Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whenever you are watching us live or recorded. Welcome to the 8th BRICS Conference at the University of São Paulo. My name is Otávio Oliveira. I'm a PhD candidate at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio, PUC-Rio, and a researcher at the BRICS Studies Group at the University of São Paulo, VIII BRICS, and I will be mediating today's roundtable. So today our speakers will talk about a very important topic through which this conference can exist in the first place, internet governance. Joining us for this panel, I welcome Dr. Luca Belli, Dr. Min Jiang, Dr. Kimfi Ilma, Dr. Olga, Dr. Sawadi Mabunda, and Dr. Daya Tussur. Before we start, I would like to thank our sponsors, Ibra China and Miguel Neto Advogados, and also our supporters, Lidi China, the South African BRICS Youth Association, and the Forum for Global Studies. Their valuable contributions made this event possible. Alongside me for this roundtable, I must thank Lucas Macedo, who's graduating in law at the State University of Maringá, where I am, and is also a researcher of VIII BRICS. Without Lucas, we will not be able to organize this roundtable as well. For our listeners on the YouTube comment section, you will find the attendance form. If you want to receive an official certificate from this conference, don't forget to fill it in, please. Finally, the comment section is open for the public. You can ask questions to our distinguished guests and interact with other members watching us live as well. At the end of our guest speeches, we'll have about 15 to 30 minutes for a quick Q&A session. So please feel free to contribute on our discussion. In the name of the VIII BRICS and Professor Paulo Casella, I would like to thank you all for your presence. I hope you enjoy our debate. I want to present our first speaker, Dr. Luca Belli. So Professor Luca is a PhD in public law from Université Panthéon-Assas in Paris. Currently, he is an undergraduate law professor and permanent faculty member of the graduate program in regulatory law at the Fundação Getúlio Vargas in Rio de Janeiro, FGV Rio, institution in which he coordinates the Center for Technology and Society and also leads the CyberBRICS project, working in the areas of internet governance, personal data protection, and digital policies in BRICS countries. With over 50 publications on internet regulation and digital policies cited in newspapers like The Economist, China Daily, and Financial Times, Dr. Lucas served as a specialist on net neutrality for the Council of Europe. He's part of the board of Alliance for Affordable Internet, director of the Latin American edition of the Computers Privacy and Data Collection Conference, and editor of the International Data Privacy Law Journal, published by Oxford University Press. Dr. Luca, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Octavio, for the very kind introduction and also for having invited me to this very timely conference. Very timely. I want to stress this as that we have just had this week the BRICS meeting in Kazan. So I'm trying to connect my presentation with some of the most recent news, also because I think it really connects very well and illustrates some of the points that I want to make in my presentation, which regards cybersecurity, digital sovereignty, and how this connects with the overall internet governance ecosystem. So let me start by sharing my presentation, which is here, and I hope now everyone can see, where I have included some material to make sure that the audience can also have some reference and understand well the train of thoughts that I want to illustrate in the next 10 to 15 minutes. Now, the first, as Octavio was mentioning, all of the material I'm going to share and to discuss comes from this project, CyberBRICS, which is housed at the Center for Technology and Society at FGV Law School since 2018. We have a very large team now, thanks to the current fellows and also the previous one. I'm very happy to see here Professor Min Jiang and Dr. Sawadi Mabunda, that are very good friends since the first cohort of the CyberBRICS fellows in 2019, and with whom we have been developing a lot of interesting ideas over the past years, and some of them I'm gonna illustrate them in the next slides. So before we get to the core, let me also state that I think something very important to understand, and that it's a very interesting angle to understand why the BRICS are relevant for internet governance or digital governance, is the very rationale of the BRICS. So the BRICS have been built to promote a multipolar order, where the Global South leaders can have a say and can lead, indeed, global issues, including internet governance, right? And this is precisely what President Lula was stressing a couple of years ago when he has less white hair. And he was mentioning that the goal of the BRICS is not to be dependent and to create alternatives. And this does not mean to compete with others, but create more options, which is very much the underlying rationale of the digital sovereignty discourse that I'm going to discuss in a few slides. Also, a very important document I think is always essential to remember, and that also with Professor Minjiang we quote in our recent book on digital sovereignty in the books, is this report of the South Commission, sorry, where the chair of the South Commission, former president of India, Prime Minister of India, Manmohan Singh, stressed that the locomotive forces of the Global South have to be found within the South itself, meaning that the Global South leaders have to lead the development and the empowerment to some extent of the Global South. And so the first question I want to bring into this picture is how cybersecurity, this core internet governance issue, entered within the BRICS agenda, which is a club governance system where usually economic and global politics issues are discussed. Well, the very brief answer is thanks to this gentleman, Edward Snowden, that in 2013 revealed a massive scheme of surveillance orchestrated by his former employer, NSA. And that is precisely the reason why at the BRICS Summit, the first BRICS Summit organized by South Africa in 2013, this novelty was included for the first time in the BRICS Declaration, the role of cybersecurity, the commitment of the BRICS countries to work together to promote cybersecurity at the global level and within a UN system as his house. And this is a very important point that the BRICS grouping has been stressing over the past 10 years. And I will mention it in a couple of slides, became very relevant precisely this year, in August this year. But before getting there, let me also stress that this was also the beginning of what in internet governance jargon is called enhanced cooperation. It's a process defined by the Tunis Agenda, which is one of the main documents when we refer to internet governance, approved in the second phase of the WSIS summit and then integrated by a UN General Assembly Resolution 60252, and is defined as a process that enables governments on an equal footing to carry out their roles and responsibility pertaining to the internet. And this is something that at the UN level has not been well specified and defined, but the BRICS grouping represents a very good example of how this in practice can play out. And here I'm going to illustrate some of the initiatives that since 2013, actually 2014, when the BRICS Working Group for ICT Security was created. These are some of the initiatives that have been created over the past decades. The BRICS Digital Partnership, the Enabling Framework for Innovation in BRICS Network, the Partnership with the New Industrial Revolution, and so on. We have really at least 10 different initiatives that illustrate concretely how the BRICS have started working together, and also the commitments that they have started putting it on paper. This is the first very relevant one, arriving with the Xiamen Declaration, including not only a commitment to promote cybersecurity, the security of ICT infrastructure, but also data protection. and the protection of personal data, which again, it's one of the core points of my presentation here, becomes extremely strategic for the BRICS since the Snowden revelation. This is something that actually is very well stressed also by the ministries of ICTs. Here's the 6th declaration of the ICT ministers that meet every year. And we're here in 2020, they reaffirmed their commitment to cooperate on digital governance and effective protection of personal data. This is something that has also been stressed by head of states. This BRICS family picture that looks a little bit like a Tarantino movie propaganda is the moment where the BRICS leaders explicitly mentioned also the commitment to establish legal framework of cooperation amongst BRICS states on matters of cybersecurity. And to some extent, they crossed the Rubicon at this point, because before 2021, there were commitments to work together, but not to explicitly work on legal frameworks of cooperation, which is something extremely relevant for countries that have been advocating for almost a decade for these issues, but not concretely putting together their commitment to legal frameworks. And why this is relevant? Because only 2 months ago, in August, 8th of August, the UN General Assembly has approved the text of the new UN Cybercrime Convention that will need to be now integrated by UN members. And this is a very good example of how this coordination, this enhanced cooperation amongst this grouping has actually bared concrete fruits even in international policy making. Now, why these issues of cybersecurity, fight to cybercrime, and data protection are particularly relevant for the BRICS grouping? Well, that is a very important issue that we have explored together with Professor Minjiang and Dr. Sagwadi Mabunda and colleagues in this first publication, this first book of the Cyber BRICS project, where we discussed how we mapped how the BRICS grouping is regulating cybersecurity and why it is particularly relevant to focus. It became particularly relevant to focus on data protection. Well, again, there is a very quick answer, which is personal data are extremely relevant. And BRICS countries are the countries where the most of personal data is currently produced or can be produced. This is a very easy question of demographics. So some of these countries are really, if we consider data as the most valuable resource that we have, personal data, some of these countries are sitting on a gold mine, basically. And so letting this extremely valuable resource being extracted by foreign company which have a direct connection with foreign intelligence is not the wisest choice we might have. And in this is one of the main reasons why over the past decade we have had this increase in cybersecurity, information security, data governance, understanding them as essential, instrumental for, on the one hand, a national digital transformation at the internal level, and on the other hand, a secure trade, right? This is the object of a very recent publication just published 1 month ago on data sovereignty in the BRICS, where we mapped why are the reasons for data sovereignty, what are the risks, what are the benefits, and what are the main lessons we can learn from the BRICS countries. That it's interesting to see that data, if we consider this as a strategic resource, it is strategic indeed to use it for the advancement of national policy, advancement of national digital ecosystem, and it is very unwise to let this resource being extracted and monetized only by foreign companies. Now, this, of course, being sovereign, as we illustrate in this research, and very well then in the book that I'm pretty sure Professor Minjiang will mention, that is also upcoming. Being sovereign doesn't mean being isolated. Being sovereign means being able to understand the technology, develop the technology, and regulate effectively the technology. This is actually a prerogative of every single state. So this does not impede communicating with other states, trading with other states, and aiming at shared rules. Actually, compatible frameworks are essential for deepen trade and to facilitate trade at the BRICS level. It is also something that we have very well illustrated in another publication that was released 2 years ago with together with Danilo Doneda. This is actually now becoming the introduction of a very large publication on data architectures in the BRICS, where we illustrated that there are already very common elements at the BRICS level in terms of data governance, shared principle, a shared set of rights and obligations, and very compatible data transfers. And therefore, there is already a very solid basis for legal interoperability in data governance. And I want to conclude with this because I'm very proud to have seen yesterday in the Kazan Declaration that was released as an output, the main output of the BRICS grouping, that these suggestions have been fully integrated by the BRICS grouping. Actually, in these two paragraphs that I want to quote here to conclude, the BRICS leaders have stressed yesterday that their commitment to state sovereignty and sovereign equality in the ICT environment, and they call for the development of global framework for data governance that ensure the interoperability of data policies. These are very important elements that our research illustrates since a couple of years at least. They're very feasible at the level of the BRICS, and the recent policy evolution illustrated it's also possible. It takes some time, some years maybe, but it's possible to achieve. Very few people would have bet some years ago that this type of BRICS coordination would have led to concrete international outputs, but I think they have been proven wrong by the recent development, and that is a very interesting reason why we should focus on these issues, and especially how the laboratory of the BRICS can play out to be a very interesting window of what will happen at the international level, not only at the BRICS level. With this, I think I could conclude my presentation because I think I'm already 1 minute out of my time, and I will let my colleague, Professor Minjiang, elaborate more on this issue of digital sovereignty, which is something that became very relevant for our research 4 or 5 years ago, and of which we have a very good outcome that I'm very proud to have organized together with Professor Minjiang, and will be published in a couple of months. Thank you very much.
You were perfectly on time, Professor Luca. Thank you for the opening speech of our event. I want to present our next speaker, Dr. Min Jiang. Dr. Jiang is a professor of communication studies, affiliate faculty member of international studies at UNC Charlotte, and CyberBRICS visiting professor at the FGV Law School, Rio de Janeiro, as Professor Luca said, and coordinates. She's also a secretariat member of the annual International Chinese Internet Research Conference, CIRC, as well as an executive steering committee member and China director of the Global Media and Internet Concentration Project, a 2.5 million CED grant to investigate media ownership and concentration issues in 30+ countries. She teaches graduate and undergraduate courses in new media technology, global media, communication theory, and digital research methods. She serves on the editorial boards of several flagship journals in communication studies, including International Journal of Communication, Journal of International and Intercultural Communication, and Communication and the Public. Dr. Jiang, please, you are next.
Thank you, Octavio, and the University of Sao Paulo BRICS Studies Group for hosting this conference panel. My esteemed colleagues and online audiences, greetings to you from North Carolina. Following the insightful remarks by my longtime collaborator, Dr. Luca Belli, who is also my co-editor of the book, Digital Sovereignty in the BRICS Countries, to be published in December by Cambridge University Press, I will speak briefly about the Chinese case, anchoring my comments around 4 issues, which I call the 4 paradoxes of Chinese internet governance, to outline some of China's strengths and challenges. A few of the paradoxes are China-specific, others may be more applicable to many BRICS Plus countries and the rest of the world. I apologize in advance that due to a class I need to teach today, I must leave the panel right after my comments, but I look forward to the connecting possibilities with everyone. Let me begin with the first paradox, which I call China, the fragile superpower to be. This paradox recognized China as a rising global power with superpower aspirations. After all, China is the world's second largest economy with a thriving high-tech sector. However, I emphasize China's current global status as superpower to be because China still has a long way to go. Last year, China's GDP was about $18 trillion, owning 2/3 of US GDP of $27 trillion. While China lifted 500 million people out of poverty in the past few decades, which is a miraculous achievement, it's worthwhile to be reminded that 600 million Chinese still live on incomes of barely $150 per month. The economic deflation that China is currently experiencing speaks also to China's fragile superpower to be status. A parallel can be found in China's tech sector as well. Although China grew a remarkable tech ecosystem in the last 30 years, the only one that actually can rival Silicon Valley, it's still vulnerable to restrictions and sanctions, as we have seen recently with the US CHIPS Act, as well as the high-profile pending case of TikTok ban in the United States. The second paradox I will speak about is on connectivity and vulnerability, which is seen in many countries across the world. Although increasing connectivity offers countries and their citizens a wide range of services and opportunities, such technologies also enable cyber threats, cyber crimes, and cyber attacks that compromise the benefits unless these negative externalities can be addressed. For instance, having close to 1.1 billion internet users, the largest in the world, China faces increasing challenges of cybercrime as well. In 2017 alone, 1/3 of the crimes in China were reportedly cybercrimes. Last year, 2023 alone, saw 50,000 Chinese individuals charged with extortions using mobile phones. Although China is often seen as a perpetrator of cyber attacks internationally, it is also on the receiving end of foreign cyber attacks suffering from considerable vulnerabilities, which is something related to the next paradox I will speak about. The third paradox I will speak about is security and surveillance. The need to address cybersecurity paradoxically often leads to national governments, including China, to develop extensive surveillance networks and mechanisms, which in turn can paradoxically lead to more network vulnerabilities, not more security. Most notably, for example, China passed the cybersecurity law in 2017 to ensure cybersecurity and codified cyberspace sovereignty into law. In 2021, 3 years ago, China also passed two important laws. One is the Personal Information Protection Law, and the second is the Data Security Law, all of which are very, very important milestones in China cyber law history. Yet, despite all the legal efforts, while more and more governments and commercial networks around the world have moved to, for example, HTTPS frameworks to enable end-to-end encryption, the Chinese government imposed a ban because more secure networks also make it difficult for government content regulators to see what sites a user is visiting and therefore reducing the government's information control capabilities. Such is, I think, is the paradox of security and surveillance in China's internet governance. The fourth and final paradox I will speak about is alliances and competition. Unlike the EU and more like the G7, perhaps, the BRICS or the new BRICS Plus framework is a loose joint venture without imposing binding conditions on its member states. In our book, Lucan and I argued geographically dispersed, economically distinct, culturally diverse, and politically different BRICS countries may not appear to be the most coherent motley crew. However, its flexibility, we argue, is also its strength. In an increasingly multipolar world where the US will keep its preeminent status, one can argue that BRICS Plus countries are building an alternative global order that runs parallel to, not in direct opposition, to a US-centered one. Of course, the informal BRICS Plus alliance does not preclude competition. As China seeks opportunities of growth in the world through Belt and Road initiatives, for example, which also include digital development programs, heightened geopolitical tensions between China and the United States will continue for quite some time, prompting different geopolitical alignments. While India, for example, in its bid for multilateral competitiveness, banned dozens of Chinese apps, including TikTok and WeChat, and continues its data trade with major countries, including the United States and Japan, and formed a new strategic alliance through the Quad framework in the Asian Pacific. This does not prevent China and India to build areas of cooperation and alliance, as Luca mentioned, under the BRICS Plus framework or other frameworks. Indeed, much can be learned from India's digital public infrastructure initiatives known as the India Stack for managing digital identities, payments, and the data exchange. Viewed from a Global South perspective, I'm referencing this again, after Luca, the BRICS Plus is the latest iteration of a much wider trend towards South-South cooperation to counterbalance a unipolar or bipolar world of governance and internet governance. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, fellow panelists and online audiences. I look forward to our future conversations. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution, Dr. Jiang. Our next speaker is Dr. Kinfe Yuma. Dr. Kinfe is an assistant professor of law at Addis Ababa University School of Law. He researches and teaches in the fields of information technology law, human rights, and law reform. Yuma has a PhD in technology law from Melbourne Law School in Australia. Please, Dr. Kinfe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Octavio. Also, thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel. I just would like to make a correction on the profile that you presented. I think this is something pulled from somewhere on the internet. It's a very old, outdated profile. I used to be an assistant professor at Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia, but have left the university, and I'm currently an assistant professor of law and technology at the University of Leeds in the UK. But the other facts are correct, at least. Now, going to my presentation. My presentation is slightly different since the panel was also framed slightly liberally. So I would like to speak about the current state of internet governance in Ethiopia, as well as the practice, and what that really means to BRICS Plus. As everyone really is familiar with, Ethiopia joined BRICS only this year. So I think having that context into the internet governance framework, as well as practice, would provide some starting point in future discussions in the ways in which internet governance evolves and develops in BRICS Plus countries. But I will make also reference to specific points focusing on privacy and data protection. I will use them as examples. Now, the first important point which I should raise is that Ethiopia, when it comes to digital technology and internet and other ICTs, is that the country has had a telecom monopoly for over a century. It's only in 2019 that Ethiopia liberalized the telecom sector. And it's only a year later, in 2020, that a new telecom operator joined the market in Ethiopia. So that means, the monopoly of the sector has had a significant implication in the ways in which the internet was governed, and the ways in which other important aspects of internet governance actually have been practiced in the country. Now, since 2019, we have, a partially liberal telecom sector, and actually the state-owned Ethio Telecom still is trying to sell parts of its stock to the public, to the locals, as well as to foreign investors. So the process of liberalization is still in flux. It's still happening as we speak. Now, this long history of telecom monopoly in the country have had an implication on several levels. At one level, it meant that the country had a very low and slow level of internet infrastructure development. This also in turn meant that the level of internet use and penetration in the country has been very low for a long time. A recent data, for example, shows that in 2014, only 20% of the population uses the internet in the country. So this really is one of the implications of the long monopoly that the state held over the sector. The other implication is that the ways in which the internet was governed was also significantly affected by the monopoly. Particularly, the country has been very slow in rolling out the requisite governance frameworks as well as institutional infrastructure. Just to give you an example, Ethiopia adopted its data protection law only this year in April 2024. The other is cybersecurity, which my colleagues have been discussing about. It's only in 2016 that the country adopted the first fully fledged comprehensive cybercrime legislation. So again, the point that I'm trying to make is that this relates to the ways in which the sector has been managed in the country. The monopoly not only delayed the infrastructure development, but also the ways in which it's governed. The same comment goes to the institutional structure. Ethiopia established a telecom regulator only in 2019, the Ethiopian Communications Authority, which currently now manages the critical internet resources like domain names, IP addresses, and so forth. So that means the governance infrastructure is still new and still an evolving, it's an evolving state. The third way in which the monopoly affected the governance of the internet is in relation to the role of non-state actors in internet governance. Because the sector was monopolized, it meant that the private sector has had little or no role in the ways in which the internet was governed in the country. Similarly, civil society groups have had a limited role. It's only after the liberalization in the past few years that we are witnessing the role of civil society groups in internet governance space. Just to give you an example, Ethiopia held the UN Internet Governance Forum in 2022. That annual summit, also a number of local civil society organizations managed to create a local internet society chapter, which seeks to really support a multi-stakeholder approach to the governance of the internet. But I'm not quite sure if there has been real significant progress in terms of having this multi-stakeholder approach to the governance of the internet in the country. So the upshot is that this long history of monopoly in the country had significantly limited the development of both governance frameworks in institutions in the country. Now, the second point which I would like to make is that within that context, the country has also been widely known for what I call internet malgovernance. The ways in which the state has been governing the internet has been problematic in many ways. I will just mention a few of them. One is that the government has long been, accused by global human rights organizations for violating citizens' free speech by blocking access to websites which allegedly are, run by political opponents or supporters of political opponents. The other is the frequent internet shutdown that happens in the country. Internet shutdown has been used by the government as an important tool to address pressing socio-political problems, for example, to address problems of national examination leaks, and also to control information about military activities in parts of the country. I don't know how many of you know this, but in Ethiopia there was a war in the northern part of the country, which many commentators said was the most costly war of the century in the Tigray region. During that war, the internet has been shut down for over a year, which has had a significant implication on obtaining key services, including banking. As we speak, internet access has been cut off in parts of the Amhara region, where there is an ongoing military conflict. So this, I think, reveals the poor way in which those involved in the governance of the internet have been, behaving. Just last week, the Freedom House has released the global internet, internet freedom report, and unsurprisingly, it declared that Ethiopia is not free, and it ranked very poorly, 27 out of 100. Now, what does this really mean for BRICS as a new member to this bloc? This legacy of internet governance in Ethiopia, I think, will have certain implications. One is, I think my colleague earlier mentioned about legal interoperability. I think that's one point which Ethiopia's membership into the BRICS Plus will give rise to. As I mentioned earlier, the requisite legal and governance infrastructure is just being set up in the country, which would ultimately limit the ways in which members of BRICS could would cooperate with the country. Not only that, the ways in which some of the recent laws I mentioned earlier, the data protection legislation, are designed also poses particular challenge to legal interoperability. Just to give you an example, this new data protection legislation gives the role of National Data Protection Authority to the telecom operator, the Ethiopian Communications Authority. Initially, the government had proposed the creation of an independent data protection commissioner, but ultimately, in the final text of the law, this power has been given to the Ethiopian Communications Authority, which is part of the executive branch of the government and hence not independent. This would ultimately could be a barrier in the free flow of data between BRICS member states. I'm not quite familiar with the way in which other member states' data protection law deals with specific aspects of data protection, but I would imagine that creation of an independent national data protection authority would be a key element of any data protection legislation. That's the first implication, I think. When it comes to internet censorship, I think with the exception of Brazil, most BRICS member states are often criticized or mentioned or associated with internet censorship. So in that sense, Ethiopia's membership into BRICS would have sends a mixed signal, in my view. In one part, democratic countries like Brazil could, push back against these well-entrenched censorship practices. But on the other hand, the presence in the membership of countries like China could embolden the government in perpetuating the internet censorship in the country. I think the other point is that joining BRICS could also have a positive impact on the ways in which the internet will be governed in the country. Our colleague earlier mentioned some of the progress made in the past few summits of BRIC member states. This could provide as a catalyst to reform progress in the ways in which internet is governed in the country. This could take various forms. For example, it could serve as some of the countries had the most effective form of governance structure, countries like India and Brazil. So this could provide as a model for the country as it strengthens its governance framework. That's all that I have. I will be happy to discuss specific matters later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kimfe. I would like to present our next panelist, Dr. Sawaji Mabunda. Dr. Sawaji is a PhD at the University of the Western Cape. Her doctoral thesis investigates the legislative responses of cybercrime by analyzing and critiquing the South African Cybercrimes Bill. She has published a number of papers on her research interests, which include cybercrime and economic crimes, such as international anti-money laundering law and international anti-corruption law. She has been invited to be a guest lecturer at the University of Western Cape on the topic of cyber money laundering, also organizing the first Economic Crime and Cybercrime Conference, hosted at the University of the same institution in collaboration with the Journal of Anti-Corruption Law. Dr. Sawaji, please give us your speech.
Thank you very much. Again, also, I want to thank you for inviting me to this very important talk, especially at this time when we are right at the back of the meeting that we've just seen in Russia. So, as the brief was also quite broad, my focus is more specifically to the things that are happening in the South African context. And I want to give a little bit of light to the way that people generally, South Africans, are experiencing cybersecurity issues, particularly when it relates to cybercrime. So going back to in preparing for this, I looked at the work that we did, as Professor Bailey mentioned, in the 2019 Cyber BRICS Fellowship, where we mapped out the cybersecurity readiness of each of the BRICS countries. So I was working on the South African cyber security readiness, and looking at where we were in 2019 as compared to where we are today, there has been some movement, positive movement in terms of our readiness, but we still do have a long way to go. So in 2019, there was policies that were in place, but they were very much in their infancy. So there was an understanding that cybersecurity is an issue, that cybercrime was becoming a very difficult problem to deal with, but there wasn't anything that is very concrete that was meant to deal with that at a more deliberate level. Today, we are seeing that there is a lot more that is done when it comes to cybersecurity, particularly when it comes to cybercrime and data protection, where we have seen the enactment of two very important pieces of legislation. The first being the Protection of Personal Information Act, which was passed in 2013, but only came into operation a couple of years ago, I think 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And then we also saw the signing in of the Cyber Crimes Act in 2020, 2020, yeah. So with those pieces of legislation, we are now seeing that we would be able to legislate and prosecute and work with different challenges that we'd have, but because they are still quite early on in their promulgation, they haven't seen as many ways that they have been tested. It is also very interesting to note the different ways that the acts will work together, or the different ways that cybercrime and personal protection would, or data protection would intersect. For one, I would like to mention an issue that we have seen recently in South Africa is that we are under a lot of attack when it comes to cyber crimes. It is estimated that we suffer at least two. We've suffered cyber attacks which have cost the country a lot of money. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Just a second. So the recent cyber attacks, or the cyber attack that we experienced was in 2021, which leads to a cyber attack that we experienced this year as well. In 2021, there was a ransomware attack on the Department of Justice. This was during COVID, where we were trying to navigate moving our court systems from being physical to being virtual. So we're trying to figure out how to make we're in the middle of lockdowns, trying to figure out how to make our courts work virtually. And the Department of Justice experienced a very significant ransomware attack. The result of that was that there were investigations that were launched, and the department said that it would be dedicating its 2022 and 2023 budget to improving the cybersecurity of the department. In 2024, what we saw as a result of that was another attack on the Department of Justice, which is quite interesting because then begs the question, if that money that was dedicated, if indeed the budget was dedicated to that, how come they were able to suffer an attack similar to the one that they had before? It was then seen the information regulator, which is an entity from the Protection of Personal Information Act. The information regulator did an investigation on that attack and actually fined the Department of Justice a fine of 5 million, because in that attack, it was found that there was a lot of personal information that had been leaked. So that shows us the way that the two would interact. Ironically, that after that attack, the 2024 or 2021 attack, there was a spillover of the attack onto the information regulator itself, which left the information regulator without the employees of the information regulator without emails for about 3 days, and they were also disrupted. So what we have seen is there is a tendency to want to work towards securing our cybersecurity. There is an understanding that cybercrime is an issue, that data needs to be protected, that the people need to be protected, but it does seem that we are still lagging behind quite significantly when it comes to bringing that to fruition. One of the ways that the country is trying to do that, to sort of bridge those gaps, is trying to focus a lot more on digital literacy and investing more on digital skills. In a speech that was given just a couple of days ago, if I'm not mistaken, by the Deputy Minister, Mondli Gungubele, he mentioned that in this new era, digital skills are no longer a luxury. They are essential for the growth, the competitiveness, and the sustainability of economy. He also mentioned that our government is deeply committed to advancing digital inclusion as a core priority in our nation's growth and development. At the heart of this is the commitment in the Department of National Digital and Future Skills Strategy, which serves as the guiding framework to ensure that all South Africans, regardless of their background or geographic locations, have access to the skills that are required to make meaningful participation in the digital economy. So my understanding of that is that while we see cybersecurity as a very important aspect that we need to focus on, we still need to build the foundation that is needed, which is in digital literacy, digital skills. And that is where we find that the private sector plays a very important role. The government may set the tone for what is necessary. We see it from the talks that are had internationally, from speeches that are made by our ministers and our president about the importance of this. But a lot of the times it wouldn't be necessary for the private sector to fill in the gaps that are there in order to do what the government may not be able to do at a large scale. So some of the notable organizations that we have, which I'd like to mention, which are doing a lot of great work in South Africa, include the Research ICT Africa, which does a lot of great work in researching digital policies. But the interesting thing about the Research ICT Africa is that they're not only limited to digital policy in South Africa, but they extend towards the all of the Saharan region. The importance of that is that because of the context of where we are, it is necessary for us to see what our neighbors are doing and be able to protect, in order for us to protect ourselves, we need to be able to protect everyone else. So having information that is available for everyone goes a long way. So they are a source of a lot of statistics from South Africa and the greater region. In my university as well, the University of the Western Cape, we also have the CoLab, which is a bit of a research institute, but that is interesting in that it has one foot in the academia, another foot in industry, and another foot working in government. So it is able to see all the different aspects that are necessary in order to make more meaningful digital policy strategies. Another one that I would like to mention is the Cybersecurity Institute, which does actually training. So one we need to focus on is not just the policy, not just the laws, but also the practical skills that people would need to know. So the Cybersecurity Institute, they have a cybersecurity school together, partnering with the Netherlands, which does trainings in that. So we are seeing a move from the private sector, NGOs, private companies, institutions and universities to make sure that we are patching every single place that needs to be patched in order to have a more robust cybersecurity a plan that will be able to lead us into a better space. For me, I think that the future does look promising. It is a very long road. It is quite difficult. Technology is moving much faster than we're able to enact laws, but it does seem that there are things that we can do to move us forward in that regard. So those are my points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Swaji. I'll present our next speaker, Dr. Olga Stuzantseva. Sorry if I didn't mispronounce that. Dr. Olga is a Senior Research Associate, DSI NRF Trilateral Research Chair in Transformative Innovation, the Fourth Industrial Revolution and Sustainable Development in the University of Johannesburg. She graduated from the university in 2000 with a specialization in international relations and has 10 years of experience at an international IT company. In 2014, she earned a PhD in history, focusing on India's science, technology, and innovation policy. In 2022, she obtained a master's degree in social anthropology. Her research explores the social and political aspects of new and emergent technologies. She has studied the participatory turn in innovation development and policy, as well as the changes in innovation systems resulting from the increased societal participation in India and Russia. She led a project on the study of the digital sovereignty concept in China and Russia, and recently her research has focused on the social-technical transition in the energy sector in South Africa and Russia, with a particular emphasis on the possibilities for phasing out the coal industry. I will share your presentation and the slides, so please let me just put here the slide.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now it sounds a bit crazy, the range of the research project. Thank you for having me. And actually today I would like to share with the results of the research that we did about Chinese and Russian concept of digital sovereignty. I think it's very relevant because when we talk about BRICS, we talk about some general middle level of concept. But if we look inside, we can find a really interesting features and specifics that actually found after this research that we did with colleagues from one Siberian university and Chinese university, because Chinese university helped us working with Chinese data. So please, next slide. What was it about? We looked how the digital sovereignty actually discussed in academic literature, and we found that actually there are two main approaches to governance in internet and digital fields. The first one is bottom-up approach that is rooted in multi-stakeholderism, where the role of the state is a bit marginalized and other stakeholders govern the digital realm. It's all connected with the digital freedom and individual freedom. And the second approach very much often is called as Chinese model and embodies a top-down governance type. And digital sovereignty is often framed, therefore, in some oppositions like national security versus open trade, or citizen rights and freedoms versus state control and surveillance, propaganda versus free information flow. And we thought that it would be interesting to understand, after all, it's very much discursive nature of the concept, and we would like to look at the ground, at the field, and investigate how digital sovereignty concepts are framed and constructed inside each country, that by academic literature are put in one basket, like top-down governance type. So next slide, please. Oh, no. Yes, next slide, yes. So we took the basic position that what is important about digital sovereignty, which fields that it could be exercised. It's about economic and political fields, international domestic questions, and also we introduced the technological part in this research, because after all, digital sovereignty is about technology. And in this perspective, we can talk about kind of traditional technologies, computers, software, and new and emerging technologies, which we called technologies of the third industrial revolutions and revolution, and technologies of fourth industrial revolution, like cloud, blockchain, and so on. And of course, we put it also in economic and political field. We created such metrics and started to deep down into media publications of both countries. We had access to Russian database of media publications since 1990s. It's very convenient to work with. In Chinese case, we did manual search for publications, and then we cleared data, made them comparative, and we used text mining software to analyze it and to create some more deep and interesting picture of how these concepts are actually formulated and constructed in these countries. So next slide, please. First, about case of Russia. So for Russian media, it's very interesting that it's the main stakeholders that I mentioned there are mostly state stakeholders, legislators, who work in parliament and in ministers and so on and so on. And this is a very much a trendy feature. And when we look at the clusters of data appeared in the scales economic, political, international, domestic, what was interesting that the most popular quadrant was domestic, political. Main agenda here was blocking social networks, instant messengers, websites, the organization of Russian segment of internet that is called RUNET, which was proclaimed as a response to threats from external forces. And at various times, Russian legislators tried to block specific internet resources that kind of violated national security or informational safety. At the same time, the first and the most crucial cluster that we found is associated with discussions of the introduction of norms restricting the free information flow. The very much often met a concept that we saw in the analysis was censorship, rights, freedom, and the Russian political context that at some point allowed different media to discuss this legislation to restrict personal rights, but obviously after the closer to 2022, this discussion media disappeared. So next very important quadrants are international political and domestic economic. And internal economic issues about the digital sovereignty are very related to import substitution. It was about primary software, the issues of digitalization of the economy and the state. And international politics forms ideas about external enemies. Very much often met words were war, attack, critical infrastructure, cybersecurity, military protection. So international political quadrant is connected with national foreign policy doctrine that actually includes some this or another measure these ideas. It is important that the confrontation is also taking place in the financial sector, in which new technologies are developed to provide advantage against dollar as a world currency. So it's a quite interesting nuance. So the issues of international relations in the economic sphere are few, maybe not so significant, and mostly they were talk about the program of platformization of interactions within Eurasian Union, and sometimes about innovation. In the country, it was during the Medvedev presidency. Next slide, please. When talking about technologies, top 100 keyword that we found was very vague. Technology, technical, software, computer, digital, digitalization, nothing much specific. And by placing technologies in the scale national versus international, the national field prevails among technological narratives. Media speaks about national three industrial revolution technologies, traditional technologies, such as domestic software, domestic services, Russian operating system. And this publication highlight the necessity to develop Russian software, to domesticate, to do import substitution. Emerging new technologies of fourth industrial revolutions are situated in the quadrant international. And mostly they talk about cryptocurrency, blockchain, and transporting technologies. So traditional technology can be attributed to international issues only in the context of creating threats from external forces that need to be addressed, and national sovereignty should be kept. So except for one cluster, new technologies are always related to the country, to the state, not to individuals, not to citizens, nothing about it. State is always the center of the narrative, not person, but user. Next slide, please. So here we introduce economic political scale, and there is a clear division of technologies between economic and political domains. Traditional technologies are connected to political field more. New technologies are biased with the economic issues, and these issues are again about collaboration for platformization within local regional unions, and sometimes about regulation of fintech. Russian media pay little attention to technologies unrelated to software or computer hardware, according to narrative analysis. Next slide, please. It's about case of China. And technologies there are presented in most clusters that we found. Technologies they mention are big data, artificial intelligence, cloud technologies, Bitcoin, and so on and so on. So more half of clusters contain technologies inside. And what is also interesting that they also mention the specific fields where these technologies are used, like city, climate, green technologies in industry, space, semiconductors, and so on and so on. So it's a very much interesting particular specific of Chinese case. And the second most frequent mention in specific countries, there are 9 clusters in total. They often intersect with ideas of partnership, international trade, and of course, they mention some different countries, listing it from corporations like Facebook, Microsoft, or Amazon, and national companies like Baidu, Alibaba, and Jingdong. So the state idea of sovereignty is only presented in one narrative, and it is very rarely talk about any specific ideas of the government. It contains some mentions of world leaders like Xi Jinping or Merkel or Trump, but it's also not very trendy. It's maybe sometimes appeared or here or there. So it could be concluded that discourse of digital sovereignty is very much non-personalized in Chinese media. So now if we look at economic, political, and international domestic scale, we can see that equal distribution of clusters among the scales, economic and political, but more popular in the discourse of the international than domestic. And it means that international questions are more discussed in Chinese media. In political issues, the main focus is on anti-colonial discourse, both in international domestic political levels. And the main issue is foreigners of Western approaches to digital sovereignty. National issues are focused on countering the monopolization of certain industries, cross-border cooperation, innovation policy, and such. Next slide, please. Here, when we talk about technologies, again, I repeat that they exist in almost every cluster that we found, and they are primarily related to issues of economic development, not politics. And here, technologies of both traditional and new type, they are equally significant in these narratives that we investigated. Next slide, please. Most of the technologies issues in the digital sovereignty discussion is connected to international relations. And in the scale international domestic, traditional technologies include related to energy, the activities of internet giants, the telecommunication issues in general. Development issues and the future of the technologies are significant in comparison with issues of global competitions and trade disputes, where actually China is trying to actualize the national sovereignty. So the emerging technology are embedded in the discussion of global issues and require cooperations. That's how it is framed in this discourse. So finally, getting to the results. Next slide, please. What we actually noticed. First, for both countries, the concept of digital sovereignty is very much state-centric. They do not discuss users, privacy, freedom of speech, anything like that. That state-centric idea is very much common for both countries. Second, the difference about how they talk about control and autonomy. In case of China, they perform it as the ability of state and companies to develop their own innovatively products, technologies, and participate in development of technologies. In Russia, it is about protection against other technologies. It's mostly about import substitution. Next, as soon as both China and Russia are discussed in literature as strong digital sovereignty countries, models, we found that it's not very much true, because in China, discourse talks about global expansion into technology markets, but in reality, we see the more strong pressure and measures in digital control of citizens. In Russia, vice versa. In discourse, it is discussed very militaristic rhetoric about digital sovereignty, but in reality, the measures limiting individual freedom in internet or digital control of citizens, they are quite soft. And they are, by the way, resistant not just by citizens, but also by providers, internet providers. It's a separate story. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. Also, what interesting we found that China talk about economic hegemony, and Russia about political side. Russia very often talk about opposition to the U.S. rule use, governance of the world and internet world the same. Who speaks in Russia? Who speaks and about which actors the media speaks? It's state actors. In China, as I already mentioned, non-personalized discourse. It's very soft regarding actors. Even universities appear there. The only maybe non-government organization are non-mentioned, but companies and universities are quite often met there. Next, both countries actually use digital sovereignty not for technological explanation as such. I mean, the concept doesn't contain only technological features, but it is used to legitimize the concept of traditional sovereignty. It is used to explain how digital sovereignty is very much connected to traditional national sovereignty. And last, that in case of China, that the new emerging technologies are very much specific, often mentioned and relevant for almost all clusters, political, economical, internal and external relations. But for Russia, it is non-relevant. For Russia, the main point are traditional technologies, and that's all. So concluding, why what does it mean in general for BRICS maybe? First, it means that the concept of digital sovereignty looks like an empty box that is actually filled by ideas of every specific country, every specific actors of the country. And then through this discursive exchange that we could watch, actually observe in media, it is created in some policy that we actually observe. And I think that our research could provide the method how to understand a digital sovereignty concept, how it is exercised and understood inside BRICS countries, each of these countries. And this could be the basics to create some common vision and common measures to develop like joint legislative and interoperability environment for cooperation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Olga, for your presentation. I will stop the shared slides. I think, yeah, we don't have the slides anymore. Okay. So I'd like to present our closing speaker for this roundtable, Dr. Daya Tusu. Professor Tusu teaches international communication at the Hong Kong Baptist University and is the current president of the International Association for Media and Communication Research. He was a visiting professor and inaugural Disney chair in global media at Schwarzman College, Tsinghua University in Beijing. For many years, he was professional of international communication and co-director of India Media Center, as well as research advisor to the China Media Center at the University of Westminster in London. He worked as a journalist both in India and the UK for the Press Trust of India, the country's national news agency, and the Gemini News Service as associate editor. Author of 18 books, among which I highlight his most recent book, Changing Geopolitics of Global Communication, published by Routledge. Dr. Daya, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Octave, for inviting me to this very interesting panel. Also, the timing is fantastic because as we are speaking, the summit of BRICS countries, BRICS plus countries, is coming to an end in Kazan. So perfect timing. I would add something which I don't think has been emphasized so much in the preceding presentations. My background is in international relations and I teach international communication. So I think a bit of politics and a bit of history is important to understand governance of the internet. So a few years ago, I think it was 2015, I wrote a chapter in a book on BRICS media, which was part of a big project that was basically organized by a colleague in Finland. We produced 3 books out of that project and several articles and conference papers. So I wrote a chapter in the first edited book, and I called it BRICS Creating NAWACO 2.0. NAWACO, for young people, is New World Information and Communication Order, which was the first international political discussion about information and how it flows, who controls that information, global information. At that time, the focus was on news agencies. It was a very political discourse. It was part of the Cold War logic of the 1960s and 70s. And the organization of which I'm very privileged to become president, IAMCR, was actually very directly involved in those debates. These were conducted mostly in UNESCO. And the basic points that were raised at that time about information inequality, the question of who has power over information remain as valid today as they were then. So I was surprised that we haven't really mentioned who actually has the control on internet governance almost explicitly. We haven't mentioned that. We have mentioned the so-called multi-stakeholder model, the dominant model. Not everybody has equal stakes in that model. The big powers are the big corporations based, without exception, in the United States. And people speak today about, data imperialism. People speak about, cloud empires. People talk about data cartels. So I think when we talk about governance, who is in control of what is the infrastructure as well as the software of global internet is worth taking into account. Having said that, as the background, this is the 30 years almost since internet became a privatized entity, and we really haven't had a global system of governance. It has been a kind of ad hoc system, largely driven by private interest. What has changed, and that was the reason of the title of my chapter, NAWACO 2.0, is what's happened in and is happening in BRICS countries. Given the scale and scope of change, and that I wrote nearly 10 years ago, today, if you include BRICS Plus, this argument is more compelling that there are alternative multi-stakeholder descriptions, not one which are coming from California. So it was mentioned earlier by a colleague from who left early, Professor Min Jian, about the Chinese internet. And it is the world's largest internet. And it has the distinctiveness of having its own infrastructure, its own platforms. And that creates a new kind of problem for the status quo, the standard practice which has been going on since 1990s. Now, some of these platforms are not just confined to the territorial space of China. They are now increasingly globalizing. In fact, an integral part of the Belt and Road Initiative, which, as we know, includes 150 countries. So it's the biggest infrastructure project in history. That's one part of the BRICS challenge. The other is my own country, where I come from, which is India, which has the largest open internet on the planet, because the Chinese one, as we know, is not open. And India has also done something remarkable, especially in the last 10 years, in terms of democratizing that internet, in terms of expanding digital connectivity, especially to the lowest rung of very divided and very complicated society. The financial transactions that are happening in India are extraordinary by any stretch of imagination. And that's been done and it's a public system. It's not owned by a private corporation. So again, another model for digital, not just technology, but digital use for empowering the most poor people on the planet. And then Russia, and what's happened in Russia in recent years. Russia has been forced to develop its own internet because it has been, for reasons I don't need to elaborate, has been asked to leave the internet that is dominant. And therefore, there are very interesting possibilities that three major, I'm not mentioning Brazil, which has a very important role in terms of articulating a distinctive position about internet governance, which going back to, maybe 20 years ago. And South Africa, as we heard from a colleague from South Africa, already has a very sophisticated discourse about governance of internet, especially in relation to cybersecurity, as we also heard. But the scale of what I call this New World Order 2.0 is what is happening in Asia, particularly. And one of the most exciting things from somebody like me, who is Indian, worked in the US, UK, and now is based in Hong Kong, is the beginning of a thaw between the two most important countries in the BRICS system, which is China and India. And they, as you probably know, the leaders met in Kazan. It is the day before that they announced their the border dispute to be discussed at different level. So I think there is something happening in a geopolitical sense, which offers, like in any other domain, in the digital domain also, a kind of alternative governance structure. Now, it's not going to be straightforward because there are fundamental differences in the BRICS countries in terms of, as was mentioned at the very beginning of this seminar, in terms of political systems, in terms of economic power, in terms of technological prowess. So it's not going to happen anytime soon. But I see a very clear possibility that in the name of this multi-stakeholder system, which will not be just the big corporates of California, but there is a very important and growing need for digital sovereignty and being articulated not just by the government officials, but also the civil society groups. And I think that offers an interesting possibility. Let me end with what's happening again to the Chinese internet. Much of the discussion outside China, particularly in the West, has focused on one very key aspect of that, which is censorship and control and regulation, and the China model, as was mentioned earlier. What has not been given as much attention by scholars or policymakers is that precisely because it was controlled and managed, it was able to develop its own platforms. No other country, not Germany, not India, not Brazil, not France, not Britain, with very substantial expertise, has been able to come anywhere close to what the Chinese have achieved. Every platform that you and I use has a Chinese equivalent. And these platforms are, as I said earlier, not just confined to the Chinese space. They're increasingly globalized. So I have called this in a different context. I called it cyber capitalism with Chinese characteristics. And I think that sums it up rather neatly, because it's essentially in the name of control and censorship, they've been able to not to have to compete with the Googles or the Facebooks of the world and develop their own. And they had the market for it. So if you're sitting in New Delhi, the debates are there also thinking, why can't we do this? We have the largest data in the world. We have the infrastructure now. We have, software. Why can't we do that? And there's all debate already happening about data colonialism, not my words, words used by one of the top industrial houses in India. So let me then just these are certain provocations. I hope they put a little more context to what we are discussing. Let me end with the chair's permission to share so many other aspects of this digital revolution and its governance. A book that I've just published, which, if I can share, can I share? Am I allowed to share?
Yes, you have the share button.
Oh, okay. Can you see this?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's called Changing Geopolitics of Global Communication. It's the first book which, at least in English language, which explicitly links international relations with global communication and looks at all some of the points I made in my presentation, but actually looks at a lot more aspects of, including the digital domain, because that's where the contestation is, whether it's political or economic or even cultural. And I want to thank the organizers once again for giving me this opportunity. And thank you.
Dr. Daya, thank you for your contribution to our roundtable and to all of our speakers for their insightful presentations. We have a quick Q&A session now. Each of our guest speakers will have about 5 minutes or so to answer the questions. Feel free to answer whichever the questions you feel you want to, okay? I would like to actually start with a question that I was thinking about throughout your speeches. And unfortunately, we don't have all of the BRICS Plus countries represented here in our roundtable. But one question that I think we could put to start the conversation would be, in the literature on internet governance models, we usually talk about the American model, the Chinese-Russian model, and the European or the multi-staker model of internet governance, right? And Professor Daya, he mentioned the idea of a global internet, which is not something that we usually think in these terms, right? So where does the BRICS Plus countries, especially the recent entered countries, find themselves? Can we think about these terms of a global internet? Moreover, can we think about local or national models of governance, or are we trapped into this tripolar mode of thinking that we either have the American, the Russian-Chinese, or the European model of governance? This would be my opening question for you all. And then we have some questions on our YouTube chat. I would like to put first, and I'm going to make this in block, and you guys can answer them however you want. Okay, so don't have a specific order of answering. So Marcelo Farias asks, regarding the issue of spreading fake news, there must be a law that regulates the good use of internet in public use. What can we do specifically to correct today and in the near future that there will be a conscious balance, humanly speaking, among the BRICS system? That's our first question from our YouTube chat. And then Lucas asks, and that's a two-part question. The first one is, what do you think about the development of the digital economy among the BRICS Plus countries? Can we reorganize the way the trade is carried out worldwide? And then the follow-up question, how BRICS countries are dealing with the development and the regulation of digital currencies, such as the CBDCs, the central bank digital currencies, and how these may influence internet governance, especially with regard to transaction security and digital privacy. If you guys want me to repeat any of the questions, feel free to ask me. And whoever wants to start, just open your mic. And yeah, thank you.
May I start? If no one else, yeah. Right, I'm trying to connect some of those questions. And first, having worked on multiple internet governance issues for the past almost 20 years. I think it is a little bit an oversimplification to speak about one type of multi-stakeholder governance model. It is usually a combination of different types of stakeholders that make a multi-stakeholder governance model applicable. And even if, and again, the fact, I think it's an oversimplification saying that China, for instance, is yes, of course, it is state-driven, but it is highly multi-stakeholder in the sense that the state coordinates the action, both in terms of policy development and implementation of a very large array of stakeholders. And of course, they are not only state stakeholder, governmental stakeholder. There is a lot of civil society, academics, and private sector involved in it. Of course, the state has a major role, but it is not all state. Exactly as in, I mean, I think it is, there is no one single multi-stakeholder model. Although there are organizations like ICANN, the Intercorporation for Assigned Names or Number, that would like to portray their model as the model, but I think everyone can have his or her own opinion about this, but there is no agreement on the fact that that is the multi-stakeholder model, but many countries have different multi-stakeholder models. Brazil has created one in its own Internet Steering Committee, Comité Gestor da Internet, that includes government and various stakeholder representatives. But it is by far not only the only Brazilian multi-stakeholder model. I'm part of the Brazilian presidency Cybersecurity Committee, which is a multi-stakeholder body, and it has a different setting. So it's, again, I think it's very important to highlight that even within the same country, there might be different multi-stakeholder models, and what makes them multi-stakeholder is there is not only one single stakeholder, only state or the private sector, but it is a diverse setting that contributes to the identification of the problems and potential solutions. Now, to come to the other question, that is actually what makes effective policies in the various fields that have been mentioned in the questions. We have a research that we published 2 years ago about content regulation in the BRICS countries with regard to how platforms, which kind of obligation exists or not in the BRICS grouping to moderate content. And at the end of the day, it all boils down to different types of censorship, of restrictions to speech. And in no country in the world there is free speech is absolute right. There is no simple country in the world that allows this. I mean, if you take the US as an extreme example of very large promotion of free speech, well, try to tell it to Julian Assange that US allow free speech in an absolute way, and we will see if he agrees or not. Try to tell it to Edward Snowden if the US allow free speech, or try to publish any copyrighted material in the social media in the US, and it will be immediately taken down because every country has restrictions. Now, the way in which this is implemented is from the US to the BRICS is through multi-stakeholder participation. Usually the government sets the rules and then the private sector implement them, because no government-run platforms, they are all run by private entities, and so you need to cooperate in this way. Similar thing happens with, and this is the last point I want to make, with financial services. We have an upcoming paper on digital public infrastructures for payments in the BRICS countries, where we map both the systems like Indian UPI or the Brazilian PIX, or the experiments that are ongoing with digital currencies organized by central banks. All BRICS countries have them. In some countries, these are more advanced, like China or Russia, and they are increasingly thinking about working together on these options. I think that is a very good element to put in the discussion, where you have a public-led initiative, but of course, then when you have to implement it, when you go to the nitty-gritty of the technology, you need to cooperate also with private sector entities. A good example is both the UPI or the PICs. At the end of the day, you access it through financial institutions that are private, that implement a digital public infrastructure, of course, but they are private. And in case of India, actually, the entity that manages it is an NGO, it's an association, the National Payment Corporation of India, which is not even a governmental entity, but is a non-for-profit entity. In the case of Brazil, it's the central bank. In the case of India, it's not even a central bank, but it is an NGO that manages this, right? So again, it's a very good example of multi-stakeholder cooperation and how this can play out to solve concrete problems. Now, I'm not sure that BRICS will ever agree on a BRICS multi-stakeholder model, but they are very good case studies to understand which kind of multi-stakeholder models exist. Thank you.
Can I go next? Thank you. Some of the things I was going to say, Professor Luca has already mentioned those. But the last point about BRICS currency has been in the news for the last 2 years at least, but nothing concrete has come out yet, because it's a very complicated situation. Countries like Brazil, South Africa, so-called democracies, India especially, would be very skeptical to have a BRICS bucket of currencies, which are essentially led by China. Same with the data protection and data flow, because if you think of India as a major software country, which makes a huge amount of money by dealing with international data, essentially US or European data. So there are national interests, core national interests involved. And I think India is a particularly interesting case because it's got one leg on the Western side and the other on BRICS. I think the most interesting aspect of that debate is what has prompted governments in BRICS, especially, but even not just BRICS, beyond BRICS, in the global South more broadly, is to think about the process of de-dollarization, because what happened in 2022 in the wake of US invasion, US slip of tongue, Russian invasion of Ukraine, and its after effect in terms of the most serious sanctions imposed on any country, even more than Iran, is indicative of what can be done. And these great social media companies, they were directly following essentially Pentagon's dictates. So I think that opens up a lot of possibilities of thinking alternative currency systems, and de-dollarization is certainly on the agenda. Of course, to implement it will take time. One final word about the multi-stakeholder thing, which was mentioned by Professor Luca. I would agree with him. Of course, there isn't, one particular model. There are different. European Union case is very interesting, but I'm really interested to kind of inquire, why is it that Europe, with all this expertise, these great universities, think tanks, resources, has not yet able to produce a single platform? Just national, forget about international platforms. They're quite happy to use essentially platforms which are from California. And just to remind again to my younger audiences, a bit of history, way back in the 80s, early 80s, late 70s, the French had a model of an internet which was not, which didn't develop because there was lots of bureaucracy and other factors involved. So I think the European model has its advantages, but it is not, in my view, as autonomous as it would like it us to believe it's subservient to the big players, which are essentially US based. And I think so multi-stakeholders, yes, but who has within that, who has the most power, I think is a very important aspect, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. Thank you.
Can I intervene? Yeah, thank you. Just continue and maybe introduce new factor of analysis to understand about the possibility of global internet or the global or BRICS platform, united platform for anything, for digital, for internet governance. I think it's very important to understand that ultimately nowadays BRICS, it's more about political or geopolitical issues. And the case of data localization law in India, that final version of this law was very much different of what it was in the initial stage. And because initially the draft of this law provided the legislation to keep data in India, but after some negotiations with the USA, the law was changed, and now it's very soft. So we should always remember that every country, especially India, China, they have their specific interest, how they use BRICS to pursue their interests. India wants very much to be independent in semiconductor industry, as well as the US. So they always be partners in a huge amount of questions, including data, including sovereignty, including internet governance. But at the same time, China is the biggest partner, trade partner for India. And I know that inside India, it's a lot of voices, right, that to ease access of Chinese engineers to access Indian market, digital market. So I think that at this stage, it's very early to talk and even think about any general platforms. As you very fair noticed, there is no real results nowadays of BRICS that would show that there is any common platform for anything. This is the union for negotiation interest and balancing it in this way or another. From this point of view, I think that at least in the nearest future, hardly we can say about any global internet or any BRICS platformization of internet governance. Too much opposite interests are involved in this union, including Pakistan question invitation for the BRICS. But I would also mention that, for example, China has specific idea about the model of governance, not multilateral, but multi-sided governance. And I think this is very promising idea, because when we talk about multilateral, we talk about multipolar. We talk about different configuration of actors, how to govern, how to deal with these issues. But if we talk about multi-sided model of governance, it may be a window of opportunity to reconcile the interests of the states, different states with different interests, to create something that would ensure more or less common platform for digital currency, for digital payments, for exchange of technologies or anything. This is maybe the more realistic future. So that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Professor Sagwajo or Kinfi, you want to elaborate on other questions?
Yes, I would like to jump in on the first question that, at least parts of it, where our audience asked where the new members of BRICS fall in these two different versions of internet governance often discussed in the literature. Well, the four new members of BRICS Iran, UAE, Egypt, and Ethiopia, I think, for various reasons, including, as our colleague earlier mentioned, geopolitical reasons, have already chosen which type of governance model that they seek to pursue. In my view, these countries, from what we know in the public, for example, at least for Ethiopia, the practices clearly suggest that it seeks to emulate the kind of governance model practiced by countries like China and Russia. We know also how Iran has been governing the internet. So in my view, these countries have already decided, and I don't know how the other democratic countries like Brazil, South Africa, and India would see the implication of this as the new countries really increase the number of countries that are often called non-democratic, because I think that would ultimately impact which type of internet governance model that you follow or choose. So I'm also mindful of the fact that BRICS is, for the most part, an economic bloc, an emerging bloc that seeks to enhance economic cooperation between these countries as an alternative model for global trade. So in that sense, I think this might not be seen as a big issue for countries like India and Brazil and South Africa. But I feel like these new members have already picked side in the way in which the internet should be governed. Thank you very much.
So I'll put just, I think, two last questions, and I mean, feel free to answer each of them or any of them, I mean, however you want to, from our group, from the BRICS group. The first one would be about the digital infrastructures aspect of BRICS Plus countries, as I think this is a theme that most certainly affects internet governance affairs. Professor Jiang, who was here before, and Professor Tusu had mentioned in their speeches about China's Belt and Road Initiative, right? And the digital aspects of the initiative known as the Digital Silk Road, which relates to, among other aspects, investments in ICT, such as data centers, subsea cables, satellite communications, and so forth. How these Chinese investments within the Belt and Road Initiative, or should I say the Digital Silk Road, affects the internet cooperation goals of BRICS Plus, as Professor Luga spoke in his presentation. How can China properly cooperate among BRICS Plus countries, considering, of course, the competing political, economical disparities within the grouping? This would be one question. And the other one, we have browsed around a few topics such as legal framework, sovereignty, and so on. But I think it would be interesting to elaborate on something that is also crucial for BRICS Plus discussions and was a topic in the other roundtables of this conference, which is sustainability, right? We know that information and communication technologies, ICTs, take a huge portion of global energy consumption, besides also affecting the environment around which the physical ICT infrastructures are built in. Where does sustainability affairs fit in this internet governance models we were browsing and talking about? We have the Paris Agreement and other shared targets for all countries, and so what do we have, or what should we have in terms of goals and common policies of these relationships between sustainability and internet affairs among the BRICS Plus countries? These would be the two questions. If anyone wants to elaborate, please just open your mic. I'll also leave the questions on our Zoom chat so you guys can reread them. Okay, thank you.
Can I go on the BRI one if that's okay? So China is actually in some ways the most important country in the BRICS system, as it were. As we all know, the idea of BRICS originally came from Russia, but it was the Chinese who appropriated that idea to tell the West, to states particularly, that look, we are not the only emerging power. There's other big countries, Brazil, India, Russia, they are also rising. So don't get threatened. So China is in some ways the most important player. And the extension of BRICS into BRICS Plus is also largely a Chinese initiative. If you think of the countries they have, encouraged to join, have a very, Ethiopia is a good case in point, but Iran also. And it's no coincidence that the diplomatic thaw between Saudi Arabia and Iran was largely engineered by Chinese diplomacy. Two traditional foes got together. I mean, not quite, but they had diplomatic relations. And Saudi Arabia has not formally joined it, but did announce that it will join. Turkey is also, has formally said it will be interested. Malaysia, Thailand, and there are 25 other countries. So a lot of it is, I think, also a dissatisfaction with the status quo. And in my view, in the longer context, it's also a certain indication of decolonization of a particular global order, which was essentially set after the Second World War, which was essentially a Western setup, and that is being challenged increasingly as the power begins to shift. And I think the extension of BRICS is a move towards that. Now, within that, of course, BRI is very important because the digital dimension of that is crucial. China is investing a lot of money to provide what it claims is cheap and affordable technology. But as we all know, there is no free lunch anywhere. There is always a cost. And it's not just the cost in terms of extending Chinese influence in those parts of the world, but also, as was mentioned, there's an environmental cost, a massive environmental cost. So in the long term, I think this is not sustainable because the kind of infrastructural projects that are planned for the next 10 years, we're talking about 900 plus projects, $1 trillion and counting. It is really not sustainable. So I think some kind of moderation is needed within BRICS to say, okay, we have to kind of stop this. And although at the same time, I should also mention that China and to some extent India also have spent a huge amount of resources in recent years to develop green technology. Also, alternative source of energy, for example, solar. So there are parallel trends to deal with this potential problem. But I think the Chinese element in all this is, to my mind, the most important.
I had raised my hand before, but I think it's not visible with the background with flags. So
I'm sorry, I didn't notice it.
No problem, no problem. I was just saying this because I figured out that it's you. I mean, it's not visible, so it's better if I go direct. I wanted to come back on 2 points. First, and that is something that we explore at length in the book that we have done with Professor Min Jiang. There are a lot of different flavors of digital sovereignty, and it is, as was mentioned before by Dr. Pushtur-Jantieva, sorry if I mispronounce your name, it really depends on what is behind the label, right? So what we really do in our book is to not only explore the narratives that have emerged over the past years in the BRICS grouping, but also the initiatives, because official narratives may be very different from initiatives in the field, or concrete initiatives may exist without the existence of official narratives, as it is the case of Brazil, for instance, where PIX is a very good example of digital sovereignty, but it has never been branded as a digital sovereignty initiative officially by the government. So it is very interesting to understand this. And also to understand that this leads me to the second point, which is the fact that you are digitally sovereign, the fact that an individual, a corporation, a state, a group of people understands the technology, is able to develop it and regulate it, does not mean that you are isolated from the others. And this is something that I stressed during my presentation and comes back to your question. The fact that China invests in 150 countries infrastructure, well, I don't see this as a problem. I don't see foreign investment as a problem at all. This is not against sovereignty. It is, the problem is when a foreign power meddle into national affairs and exploit their investment or their technology to meddle into national affairs. That is a problem. But if you understand what are the costs and benefits of the technology, if you understand the technology, if you are not dependent to the foreign technology, and if you regulate it effectively, you're sovereign, you're digitally sovereign. And so this is not dichotomic to cooperation. On the contrary, countries have been sovereign and cooperating over the past four centuries, at least since the Westphalia peace. And we only have to understand this in digital terms, using as a prism to understand this, the fact that you can perfectly use other technology developed in other countries, as long as you understand what are the risks that this may entail, and you're able to mitigate them. And again, this is not something that the fact of being able, willing to reassert your own values on technology is not something that is for authoritarians or democrats. It's the job of any kind of government. I mean, for those here that may have studied data protection and as a field of digital governance, the European Union since the 90s can decide with which countries there is free flow of data. And that is not an authoritarian view. It's simply the prerogative of a government to protect their own citizens' rights. And so if you have a law that protects personal data and the rights of individuals linked to personal data, you allow it with countries that have similar frameworks, be them legislative frameworks or contractual frameworks. We actually analyzed this in the paper I was mentioning that we published a couple of years ago and that now became a book that I hope will be published in the next semesters. The fact that you reassert sovereignty on how data are governed, that is absolutely not incompatible with cooperating with the others. There are very good examples of countries that have created agreements from soft law to hard law, the international law, the Convention 108 of the Council of Europe, or the Malabo Convention of the African Union are a very good example of countries that jointly crafted a framework for international harmonization and legal interoperability of data governance. The OECD has adopted in 1981, so 40 years ago, the guidelines on the protection of personal, of privacy and free flows of data, and it's not by any standard in a group of authoritarian countries. So again, I think the two things are very much compatible, and if we understand what these elements mean in practice and what the regulation and technology that we are discussing about means in practice, then we realize that we can reconcile things. Of course, it takes effort, but it is feasible.
Can I intervene? I think that Professor Luca is really right about the possibilities, except for one point. For authoritarian regimes, it's very important what content is flowing inside the country, because there is some mainstream narrative that state is trying to support. And that's why they want to limit the intervention of outer information, of delivering diversification of information. That's what we call propaganda. That's what we call fake news. And this is actually the main point of how to govern data, because and this what distinguishes authoritarian regimes from democratic regimes, because in democracy regimes it's not a problem to have many voices. But authoritarian regimes, this is the problem. And actually, it's somehow connected to sustainability questions. For example, in Russia, they started to block Wikipedia and create Russapedia. And the data, not data, information that they put there, it is not verified, and it is created, and it is supported by some friendly scientists from China, for example. And it is opposed to unfriendly British scientists, you see? So this is very sensitive questions, I think, and this is how and why we should pay attention and distinct authoritarian regimes and democratic regimes in data governance, I think.
Just a quick reaction on this, just to stress that these are two very different things. Governance of personal data that are collected for specific services, and content and information that is uploaded in as freedom of expression. These are two very different things. And when I'm speaking about governance of data, or I'm speaking about data that are used in services, like personal data that may be collected for specific services, or data that are harvested about specific sector to improve the performance of how specific technology works. What you are speaking is a very important issue, but it's really not the same thing. We are speaking about freedom of expression and freedom of information. Of course, they are data. Information is data with meaning, but they are two very different things. What I'm speaking about is the first part. I totally agree with you on the second part, but I think also one must distinguish the two things not to make confusion.
Well, I think if the Professor Sawadi or Kifi wants to elaborate on one of the questions, or?
No, not necessarily. I think maybe going back to a previous question that was asked, I got disconnected with the internet as the last round was going. But on the question of regulating fake news, I think because fake news is a global question, right? It's a global issue that we're dealing with, not necessarily something which is unique to the big BRICS countries. It would need to be a conversation that is had all around in order to determine what can and cannot be regulated through the law. Also considering that there are different incentives from either governments or the people to determine what would you categorize as being fake news or what would you label as being fake news. So I think it is also important for us to not overestimate the kinds of power or the kinds of things that the BRICS nations, BRICS plus nations can do, but also contextualize it in the global context. There's things that we are able to do, things that we're not able to do. So I think just thinking about it in like a global context might make things a little bit easier. But apart from that, that's all that I have to offer. Thanks.
Mr. Kifi, do you want to elaborate on one of the questions, or? I think you're muted.
I don't have anything to add.
Yes, thank you. So I think with the last comments and interventions, we can conclude our roundtable on internet governance. In the name of the BRICS Studies Group of the University of São Paulo, I would like to thank our guest speakers for your time and our audience for the interaction. For those live, don't forget to please fill in the attendance form in the YouTube chat. This table will also be available on our YouTube channel at Ibrachina Oficial. We're going to share these on our social media as well, if anyone wants to watch this table in the future. And I think with that, we can conclude our roundtable. Thank you all for your presence. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for organizing it and inviting us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.